When Sarah Chen traded her software developer boyfriend for a Ferrari-driving investment mogul, she thought she was upgrading her life. Designer clothes, luxury vacations, and a fairy tale wedding followed, until the day she woke up to find her husband gone and the FBI at her door. Now, with her world shattered and her reputation in ruins, Sarah must face the true cost of choosing glitter over gold. Sarah Chen stared at her reflection in the mirror of her cramped studio apartment, mascara-stained tears rolling down her cheeks. The designer dress she'd bought on credit lay crumpled on the floor, a painful reminder of her foolishness. How had everything gone so terribly wrong? 6 months earlier, her life had been completely different. She'd been dating Michael Zhang, her college sweetheart of 3 years. Michael was a software developer at a promising startup, working long hours to build his career from the ground up. He was kind, honest, and loved her deeply. But Sarah had grown restless. Their modest lifestyle didn't match the glamorous images she saw on social media every day. While her college friends posted photos from exotic vacations and showed off designer purchases, Sarah and Michael spent their weekends in their small apartment, cooking dinner together and watching movies. He was careful with money, always talking about saving for their future, but Sarah wanted more immediate gratification. That's when Victor Zhao entered the picture. Victor was everything Michael wasn't: flashy, bold, and seemingly wealthy beyond measure. He drove a Ferrari, wore custom suits, and lived in a penthouse apartment with breathtaking views of the city. When he started showing up at the high-end retail store where Sarah worked, she couldn't help but notice him. At first, Sarah tried to resist Victor's attention. She would mention Michael whenever Victor flirted with her, but Victor would just smile knowingly and say things like, "You deserve someone who can give you the world, not just promises of a better future." The expensive gifts started arriving at her workplace. A Hermes scarf one day, a Cartier bracelet the next. Each came with handwritten notes comparing her beauty to the finest luxuries money could buy. Sarah's coworkers swooned, and she felt like a princess in a fairy tale. When Michael noticed the gifts, Sarah lied and said they were replicas she'd bought online. The guilt gnawed at her, but Victor's attention was intoxicating. He promised her a life of luxury, travel, and endless adventure. "Why wait years for success," he would whisper, "when you could have it all right now?" The breaking point came during a dinner with Michael. He'd been excited to share news about a promotion at work, one that would help them start saving for a house. But all Sarah could think about was the yacht party Victor had invited her to that weekend. "I can't do this anymore," she blurted out, cutting Michael off mid-sentence. "I've met someone else." The look of devastation on Michael's face would haunt her for months to come. He didn't yell or make a scene. He just sat there, silent tears falling into his half-eaten meal, before quietly asking, "How long?" Sarah moved out the next day, ignoring calls from her parents and closest friends, who all warned her she was making a terrible mistake. Victor welcomed her into his penthouse with champagne and roses, and within weeks they were engaged. The wedding was a lavish affair at the city's most exclusive hotel. Sarah wore a custom-made gown that cost more than her annual salary, and Victor spared no expense on the celebrations. Her parents refused to attend, but Sarah was too caught up in the glamour to care. The first sign that something was wrong came during their honeymoon in the Maldives. Victor's credit card was declined at dinner. He laughed it off, blaming it on a security measure from his bank, and used a different card. But then it happened again at the spa, and again when they tried to arrange a private yacht tour. Back home, Sarah began noticing other discrepancies. Bills arrived marked "Final Notice" in angry red letters. The Ferrari disappeared, supposedly in the shop. Victor started working late hours, becoming evasive about his business dealings. One morning, Sarah woke up to find police officers in their living room. Victor was already gone, leaving behind only a hastily scribbled note. "I'm sorry, things got complicated. Don't try to find me." The truth emerged in a devastating cascade. The penthouse had been rented, not owned. The luxury cars were leased under false pretenses. Victor's supposed investment firm was a sophisticated Ponzi scheme, and she was now married to one of the city's most wanted white-collar criminals. In the weeks that followed, Sarah learned the full extent of Victor's deceptions. He had targeted her specifically, knowing she worked in luxury retail and had connections to the city's wealthy shopping clientele. Her marriage had been part of his scheme to appear more legitimate to potential investors. Now, sitting in her tiny studio apartment, all she could afford after the scandal. Sarah thought about Michael. She'd seen him in the news recently. His startup had just received major funding. The article mentioned his innovative approach to ethical business practices and quoted him saying success meant nothing without integrity. Sarah's phone buzzed with another message from her lawyer. More documents needed signing, more questions about Victor's whereabouts needed answering. She'd been cooperating fully with the investigation, but the shame of her gullibility weighed heavily on her. Her parents had finally started speaking to her again, but their conversations were strained. Her mother had always praised Michael's character, saying he reminded her of Sarah's father when he was young, hardworking, honest, and devoted. Sarah had dismissed such old-fashioned values in her pursuit of luxury and excitement. Looking through her closet, now filled with fast fashion instead of designer labels, Sarah found an old photo booth strip from her time with Michael. They looked so happy, making silly faces at the camera, completely content in their modest but authentic life together. She remembered how Michael would surprise her with small, thoughtful gifts. A book by her favorite author, a framed photo of their first date, homemade cookies when she was having a bad day. Victor's gifts, in contrast, had always been about showing off, about creating an image. There had never been any real thought behind them, just like there had never been any real substance behind his promises. Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a news alert. Another victim of Victor's schemes had come forward. The article mentioned that his trail of destruction spanned multiple cities and included at least 3 other marriages. She felt sick realizing she wasn't even his first wife. She was just another mark in his elaborate con. She opened her laptop and stared at the blank document where she was supposed to be writing her victim impact statement for the prosecution. How could she explain how thoroughly Victor had deceived her without admitting to her own role in the deception? After all, she had chosen to believe his lies because they promised her the life she thought she wanted. Her younger sister Jenny had been the only one to see through Victor from the start. "He's too perfect," she had warned. "Nobody's life is as polished as he pretends his is." But Sarah had accused her of jealousy and stopped speaking to her. Now Jenny's words echoed in her mind as she thought about all the red flags she'd willfully ignored. A notification popped up on her phone, another social media memory from 2 years ago. It was a simple photo of her and Michael at a public park, having a picnic on a sunny day. She remembered how they'd spent hours there, talking about their dreams, making plans for a future they would build together. Michael had brought her favorite sandwiches, and had even remembered to pack extra napkins because he knew she always spilled something when she ate outdoors. And Sarah found herself wondering what Michael was doing now. Through mutual friends, she knew he was still single, though apparently there had been interest from a fellow developer at his company. The thought made her stomach twist with an emotion she didn't want to name. Her phone buzzed yet again. Another message from the detective handling Victor's case. They had tracked some suspicious transactions to an offshore account and needed her to verify some dates. As she scrolled through her calendar from the previous year, each entry reminded her of another lie, another manipulation, another red flag she'd chosen to ignore. The sun was setting outside her window, casting long shadows across her small apartment. She had a shift at her new job tomorrow, a position at a small boutique that paid far less than her previous role, but had hired her despite the publicity surrounding Victor's case. The owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Liu, had known her parents for years and believed in second chances. Sarah changed into her pajamas and made herself a cup of tea, using the simple ceramic mug Michael had given her for their first Christmas together. She'd kept it, even through everything, though she couldn't explain why. As she sipped the warm liquid, she thought about how different her life would be now if she'd made different choices. Her laptop pinged with an email notification. It was from her therapist, confirming their appointment for tomorrow. They'd been working through Sarah's tendency to chase external validation, her fear of missing out, and her habit of comparing her life to carefully curated social media posts. It was hard work, forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. In the quiet of her apartment, Sarah began writing in her journal, another suggestion from her therapist. She needed to understand how she'd become so lost in the allure of wealth and status that she'd thrown away something real for a beautiful illusion. The journal entries were becoming more frequent, a daily ritual of reflection that helped Sarah process her complicated emotions. Tonight, she wrote about seeing one of Victor's other victims at the courthouse, The woman, Rebecca, had lost her entire inheritance to his schemes. Unlike Sarah, Rebecca hadn't known Victor's true nature. She was simply an investor who trusted his charming demeanor and seemingly impressive credentials. Sarah had avoided making eye contact with Rebecca in the courthouse hallway, but the woman approached her anyway. Instead of the anger or accusation Sarah expected, Rebecca had shown her kindness. "We all want to believe in fairy tales sometimes," she'd said softly. "The important thing is what we learn from the experience." Those words stuck with Sarah as she navigated her new reality. Her studio apartment, while small, was slowly becoming a home. She'd decorated it with secondhand furniture and prints from local artists, creating a space that felt authentic rather than showy. It wasn't the luxury she'd once craved, but there was something satisfying about knowing everything in it was truly hers. Work at Mrs. Liu's boutique was teaching her valuable lessons too. Unlike her previous job, which had focused on pushing expensive products onto status-conscious customers, Mrs. Liu's shop emphasized quality and sustainability. They sold carefully curated pieces that were meant to last, and Mrs. Liu taught Sarah to appreciate craftsmanship over brand names. One rainy Tuesday, Sarah was arranging a window display when she spotted Michael across the street. He was walking with a colleague, holding an umbrella over both their heads. The woman was pretty in an understated way, laughing at something Michael had said. Sarah ducked behind a mannequin, her heart pounding, but continued to watch as they entered a cafe. Through the cafe window, she could see them settling at a table, their easy companionship evident in their body language. Sarah remembered how simple things had been with Michael, how comfortable their silence could be. With Victor, she'd always felt like she was performing, trying to live up to an impossible standard. That evening, Sarah received an unexpected call from Jenny. Her sister had recently gotten engaged and, despite their past conflicts, wanted Sarah to be her bridesmaid. "It's a small wedding," Jenny explained. "Just family and close friends at Mom and Dad's house. Nothing fancy." The unspoken comparison to Sarah's own lavish wedding hung between them. As Sarah listened to Jenny describe her simple wedding plans, she felt a profound shift in her perspective. Her sister, who earned a modest teacher's salary, was planning a celebration focused on love and family rather than impressing others. The happiness in Jenny's voice was genuine, untainted by any need to prove her worth through external displays of wealth. The next day at work, Mrs. Liu noticed Sarah seemed distracted. The older woman made them both tea in mismatched cups and shared stories about her own marriage of 40 years. "My husband and I started with nothing," she said, showing Sarah a faded photo of a young couple in front of a tiny shop. "But we built everything together, brick by brick. That's real wealth, Sarah, the kind that lasts." Sarah's therapy sessions began focusing on her future rather than her past. Her therapist encouraged her to think about what she truly valued. Stripped of societal pressures and social media influences, Sarah realized she missed the sense of purpose she'd felt with Michael, working toward shared goals and building something meaningful together. The investigation into Victor's crimes continued to uncover new details. Investigators found evidence that he had orchestrated similar schemes in other countries, always targeting people's desires for a luxurious lifestyle. Sarah provided whatever information she could, hoping to prevent others from falling for the same tricks. One morning, Sarah received an email from a journalist wanting to write about her story. The reporter's angle wasn't sensational. Instead, she wanted to explore the social pressures that made people vulnerable to fraudsters like Victor. Sarah hesitated, knowing the article would bring renewed attention to her mistakes, but something about the reporter's approach resonated with her. As she drafted her response to the journalist, Sarah thought about all the young women who, like her former self, measured their worth by the brands they wore and the lifestyle they projected. Perhaps sharing her story could help others avoid the same pitfalls. Her parents invited her to Sunday dinner, a standing tradition she'd abandoned during her time with Victor. Her father picked her up in his well-maintained but aging sedan, the same car he'd driven since Sarah was in high school. She used to be embarrassed by it, but now she saw it differently, as a testament to his pragmatic, unassuming nature. During dinner, her mother mentioned running into Michael's mother at the grocery store. Apparently, his startup was doing even better than the news had reported. But what caught Sarah's attention was the casual mention that he'd been asking about her, wondering if she was okay after everything that had happened with Victor. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Michael's concern for her welfare. even after how badly she'd hurt him. It was so characteristic of him, thinking of others first, showing compassion even when it wasn't deserved. She remembered how he used to leave little notes in her lunch when she had important meetings at work, or how he'd wake up early to make her coffee just the way she liked it. The contrast between Michael's genuine care and Victor's calculated manipulation became starker with each passing day. Victor had studied her social media, figured out her insecurities, and played to her desires. Every romantic gesture had been carefully designed to impress not just her, but their entire social circle. It had all been part of his broader scheme to appear successful and trustworthy to potential investors. Sarah found herself walking past the startup incubator where Michael's company was based, timing her coffee breaks to coincide with when she used to know his schedule. She told herself she just wanted to apologize, to let him know she understood now what real value looked like, but deep down, she knew seeing him with his new colleague had awakened feelings she thought she'd buried. The article about Sarah's experience was published on a quiet Thursday morning. She read it over coffee in her favorite local cafe, the one she'd specifically avoided because it was where she used to meet Michael for breakfast. The journalist had handled her story with sensitivity, focusing on the societal pressures that made successful, intelligent women vulnerable to predators like Victor. Within hours, her phone was buzzing with messages from other women sharing similar experiences. Some had dated men like Victor. Others had simply felt the crushing pressure to maintain appearances beyond their means. Each message reinforced what Sarah's therapist had been telling her. Her story wasn't just about being deceived by a con man. It was about society's obsession with status and appearance. Mrs. Liu noticed the article on her phone during lunch break and squeezed Sarah's hand. "Now you're helping others," she said with a warm smile. "That's how we turn pain into purpose." The older woman's wisdom, once dismissed by Sarah as old-fashioned, now felt like a lifeline to a more authentic way of living. Sarah's inbox filled with interview requests from other publications, but she declined them all. One message, however, caught her attention: an invitation to speak at a women's empowerment conference about financial literacy and relationships. The organizer mentioned that many young professionals struggled with balancing their desires for success with authentic relationships. As Sarah prepared her speech for the conference, she found herself thinking about the subtle warnings she'd ignored with Victor, the way he always seemed to run into her, accidentally, at high-end stores, how he knew her favorite designers before she'd told him, the convenient explanations for why his business dealings had to remain private. In retrospect, the red flags were glaring. One evening, while working late at the boutique, Sarah heard the bell above the door chime. Looking up, she froze. It was Michael's colleague, the woman she'd seen him with at the cafe. The woman, introduced as Claire, was looking for a gift for her mother's birthday. As Sarah helped her choose a scarf, they fell into easy conversation. Claire mentioned the startup casually, saying how much she admired Michael's leadership style and integrity. "He always emphasizes that our success should never come at the cost of our values," she said, unknowingly twisting the knife in Sarah's heart. "It's rare to find someone so genuinely good in the tech world." That night, Sarah dreamed of her first date with Michael. They'd gone to a food truck festival, and she'd gotten sauce all over her new white blouse. Instead of being embarrassed, Michael had spilled sauce on his shirt too, making them match. They'd laughed about it for weeks afterward. With Victor, she'd never felt comfortable enough to be imperfect. The women's conference was approaching, and Sarah threw herself into preparation. She started gathering statistics about financial fraud and its emotional impact on victims. But more importantly, she began examining her own responsibility in what had happened. Yes, Victor was a master manipulator, but she had chosen to believe his lies because they aligned with what she wanted to hear. During one of her therapy sessions, Sarah finally admitted something she'd been avoiding. She missed Michael, not just the relationship, but the person she was when she was with him. Someone who valued substance over style, who could find joy in simple moments, who didn't need expensive gifts to feel special. Her therapist helped her understand that this realization wasn't about wanting Michael back. It was about recognizing the values she'd lost sight of in her pursuit of an Instagram-worthy life. "Sometimes," her therapist said, "we need to lose our way to find our true path." Sarah's parents attended a preparation session for her conference speech. Watching them sit in the back of the room, holding hands just like they had at every school play and graduation, she saw their marriage in a new light. They had built their life together slowly, choosing stability over flash, substance over show. Their home wasn't featured in magazines, but it had never missed a mortgage payment. The night before the conference, Sarah received an email that made her heart stop. It was from Michael. He had heard about her speaking engagement from Claire and wanted to say he was proud of her for turning her experience into something positive. The email was brief and professional, but it was signed with his old nickname for her, Sarah Bear, the one he'd given her after their food truck mishap. As Sarah prepared to take the stage at the conference, she caught a glimpse of herself in the green room mirror. She was wearing a simple black dress from Mrs. Liu's boutique, her mother's vintage pearl earrings, and sensible shoes that wouldn't make her tower over the podium. A year ago, she would have considered this outfit beneath her. Now, she saw elegance in its simplicity. The lights in the auditorium were bright, making it hard to see the audience. But as Sarah began to speak, she noticed a familiar figure slipping into a seat in the back row. Even from a distance, she would know Michael anywhere. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to focus on her speech. She had important things to say, about worth and value, about the difference between price tags and priceless moments. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued her speech, sharing the painful lessons she'd learned about authentic happiness versus the illusion of success. The audience hung on every word, particularly when she described the moment she realized her entire marriage had been built on carefully constructed lies. From her podium, she could see Michael shifting in his seat, his expression unreadable in the dim lighting. She hadn't prepared for his presence, hadn't imagined he would actually come. Yet here he was, wearing one of his characteristic plain blue button-downs, the kind she used to tease him about owning in every shade of blue possible. After the speech during the networking reception, Sarah found herself surrounded by women sharing their own stories of relationships damaged by materialism and social pressure. One young executive admitted to breaking up with her college boyfriend because he couldn't afford the lifestyle she thought she deserved. But now he's the CEO of a sustainable energy company, she said ruefully, and I'm still trying to keep up with Instagram influencers. Sarah was nodding sympathetically when she felt a presence behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know it was Michael. She recognized his cologne, the same subtle scent he'd worn since college. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she excused herself from the conversation. "That was quite a speech," Michael said softly. Up close, she could see the slight shadows under his eyes, the new creases at the corners that suggested long hours at work. He looked more mature, more settled into himself. Before Sarah could respond, Claire appeared at Michael's side with 2 glasses of champagne. "Sarah, your speech was incredible," she exclaimed, handing 1 glass to Michael. "I told Michael he had to come hear it. The way you talked about building genuine success versus chasing appearances, it perfectly aligns with what we're trying to do at the company." Sarah watched as Claire's hand naturally found its way to Michael's arm, the gesture speaking of easy familiarity. She felt an old pain in her chest, but it was different now. Not the sharp stab of jealousy she might have expected, but a dull ache of recognition. This was the consequence of her choices. The conversation was interrupted by Sarah's phone buzzing. It was a message from her lawyer. They had finally traced some of Victor's hidden assets, and her testimony had helped build a case that would ensure he faced justice. The news should have felt like victory, but standing there between Michael and Claire, it just reminded Sarah of everything she had lost in pursuit of a lie. Later that evening, at a small dinner celebrating the conference's success, Sarah found herself seated next to an elderly woman who had been one of the event's major donors. The woman shared her own story of leaving a promising career in the 1960s to marry a wealthy man, only to discover he had been embezzling from his company for years. "The hardest part wasn't losing the money or the status," the woman confided. "It was realizing that I had traded my self-respect for things that didn't really matter. But you're luckier than I was, dear. You're learning this lesson while you still have time to write a different ending to your story." Those words echoed in Sarah's mind as she lay awake that night, thinking about Michael's presence at her speech. She opened her laptop and found herself looking at his company's website. Their mission statement emphasized creating technology that improved lives rather than just generating profits. It was so perfectly Michael: success with substance, achievement with integrity. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Mrs. Liu's boutique early. As she was arranging a new window display, she spotted Claire walking past, engaged in what appeared to be an intense phone conversation. The other woman was gesturing animatedly, her expression troubled. Without thinking, Sarah rushed outside. "Claire, is everything okay?" The words were out before she could stop herself. Claire looked up, surprised, then gave a weak smile. "Oh, Sarah, actually, I could use some advice. Do you have a minute?" They ended up at the cafe across the street, where Claire revealed she had received a job offer from a major tech company, one that would take her to the opposite coast and came with a substantial salary increase. "But Michael," she paused, twisting her napkin. "He's been such a mentor, such a friend. The thought of leaving the company, leaving him." Sarah felt a strange mix of emotions as she listened to Claire describe her relationship with Michael. It wasn't what she had assumed. There was admiration there, certainly, but not romance. Claire spoke of Michael the way one might talk about a respected older brother. "He'll support whatever decision you make," Sarah found herself saying. "That's who Michael is. He always wants the best for people, even when it hurts him." The words caught in her throat as she realized she was also describing what she had failed to appreciate about him. Back at the boutique, Sarah received another email from the journalist who had written her story. There was interest in turning it into a book, not just about Victor's fraud, but about the larger social issues that made such deceptions possible. The advance would be enough to pay off the last of her credit card debt from her time with Victor. As Sarah considered the offer, she thought about how different her definition of success was now. A year ago, she would have seen a book deal as a path to celebrity, to social media followers and influencer status. Now she saw it as an opportunity to help others avoid her mistakes. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Coffee tomorrow? There's something I need to discuss with you." Sarah stared at the message, her finger hovering over the reply button, wondering what this conversation could mean. Sarah sat in the familiar cafe the next morning, her hands wrapped around a cup of plain black coffee. No more elaborate sugary concoctions that she used to order to match her designer lifestyle. Through the window, she saw Michael approaching, his gait as steady and purposeful as ever. He slid into the seat across from her, ordered his usual green tea, and got straight to the point. "I'm expanding the company's philanthropic division," he said. "We're launching a foundation to educate young professionals about financial literacy and ethical business practices. After your speech yesterday, I think you would be perfect to head it." Sarah's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "Me? But after everything—" "Because of everything," Michael corrected gently. "Your experience, your understanding of how social pressure and appearance can cloud judgment. It's exactly what people need to hear. And you've shown remarkable growth in how you've handled the aftermath." As Michael outlined his vision for the foundation, Sarah noticed he was wearing the watch she'd given him for their second anniversary. A simple timepiece chosen because it reminded her of his grandfather's. She'd saved for months to buy it, back when she still understood the value of earning something meaningful. Claire's situation came up naturally in the conversation. "She told me about the job offer," Michael said, stirring his tea. "I'm going to miss her expertise, but she needs to follow her own path." There was no hint of romantic loss in his voice, confirming what Sarah had begun to suspect. Their discussion was interrupted by an urgent call from Sarah's lawyer. They had finally traced Victor's latest location. He was attempting to start a new scheme in Singapore under an alias. The prosecutor wanted Sarah to fly out to assist with the international investigation. "You should go," Michael said after she explained the situation. Helping catch him could give closure to a lot of people. His support was so characteristic, so fundamentally Michael, that Sarah felt tears pricking at her eyes. Before she could respond, the cafe's door chimed and a stunning woman in business attire walked in. She headed straight for their table, and Michael stood to greet her with a warm but professional smile. "Sarah, this is Mei Lin, our new chief financial officer." Mei Lin's handshake was firm, her smile genuine. "I've read about your experience," she said. "Your perspective on how emotional manipulation intersects with financial fraud is fascinating. I'd love to incorporate your insights into our corporate ethics training." As the three of them discussed possibilities for collaboration, Sarah observed the subtle dynamics between Michael and Mei Lin. There was respect there, perhaps the beginning of something more, but it was built on shared values and intellectual connection. Everything her relationship with Victor had lacked. Later that evening, Sarah began packing for Singapore. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jenny. Her sister's wedding was being postponed. "David and I decided we want a longer engagement," the text read. "We realized we're doing this for us, not for anyone else's timeline." Sarah smiled at her sister's wisdom, remembering how she had rushed into marriage with Victor, eager to secure her place in his glamorous world. As she folded clothes into her suitcase, practical pieces now, chosen for comfort and durability, she thought about Michael's job offer. The foundation would mean working closely with him, seeing him build a life with someone else, possibly Mei Lin. Could she handle that? But then again, maybe that was part of her journey, learning to value relationships of all kinds, not just romantic ones. Her mother called while she was still considering the offer. "I heard about the foundation opportunity," she said, "and the Singapore trip." There was a pause. "You know, sweetheart, sometimes life gives us second chances, just not in the way we expect." In her small studio apartment, Sarah opened her laptop to research Singapore's financial regulations. A notification popped up. Another victim of Victor's had come forward, this time a young entrepreneur who had lost her startup funding to his schemes. The woman's story was heartbreakingly familiar. As Sarah drafted her acceptance email for the foundation position, she thought about how every choice had led her to this moment. The path forward wasn't clear, but for the first time since her world imploded, she felt like she was moving in the right direction. Her phone lit up with another text from Michael. "One more thing about the foundation." Sarah's heart skipped as she opened the message, wondering what else this new chapter might hold. The text from Michael continued. "Would you be willing to meet with our board of directors next week, before you leave for Singapore? They want to hear your vision firsthand." Sarah's fingers hovered over her phone, her mind racing. A board meeting meant facing the city's business elite, the same circles where Victor had once moved so convincingly. But this time, she would be presenting something real, something earned through hard lessons and genuine growth. As she prepared her presentation over the next few days, Sarah discovered newspaper archives detailing Victor's earlier cons. His pattern became clear. He always targeted communities during times of economic prosperity, when people were most afraid of missing out on opportunities. One photo showed him at a charity gala 5 years ago, with a different woman on his arm. She had the same hungry look in her eyes that Sarah recognized from her own old photos. The morning of the board meeting, Sarah chose her outfit carefully. A navy blazer from Mrs. Liu's boutique, paired with classic trousers and her mother's pearls. Professional, but not showy. As she waited in the sleek conference room, she noticed Michael's company had none of the ostentatious displays of wealth that had decorated Victor's fake office. Mei Lin arrived early, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need this," she said, handing one to Sarah. "Board meetings can be intimidating, but remember, you have something they need. Authenticity can't be bought." The board members filed in, and Sarah recognized several faces from her previous life. People who had attended her wedding to Victor, who had invested in his schemes. Their expressions showed varying degrees of recognition and discomfort. One woman, in particular, wouldn't meet her eyes. Sarah remembered her bragging about tripling her investment with Victor at the wedding reception. Michael sat quietly in the corner as Sarah began her presentation. She started not with statistics or proposals, but with her own story. Her voice grew stronger as she described how social pressure and the fear of missing out had made her an ideal target for manipulation. "The victims of financial fraud aren't just those who lose money," she explained. "They're often successful, intelligent people whose desire for status makes them vulnerable. Our foundation won't just teach financial literacy. It will address the cultural factors that make these schemes possible." The board members leaned forward as she outlined her plans for educational programs, support groups, and preventive initiatives. Even the woman who had avoided eye contact earlier was now taking notes intently. During the Q&A session, Sarah noticed Michael and Mei Lin exchanging glances and subtle nods. There seemed to be an easy understanding between them, the kind that comes from shared values and mutual respect. Surprisingly, seeing their connection no longer hurt. It felt right, like pieces falling into place. After the meeting, as the board members filed out with murmurs of approval, Sarah's phone buzzed. Another message from her lawyer. The Singaporean authorities had new evidence suggesting Victor's scheme was larger than anyone had suspected. Her testimony would be crucial in an international investigation. And that Michael caught up with her as she was gathering her materials. "The board was impressed," he said. "They want to fast-track the foundation's launch. But with your trip to Singapore—" "I need to go," Sarah said firmly. What kind of foundation leader would I be if I didn't help bring him to justice? Mei Lin joined them, her expression thoughtful. What if we turn this into an opportunity? The foundation could establish international connections, partner with overseas organizations. You could lay the groundwork while you're there. As they discussed possibilities, Sarah realized how different this felt from her conversations with Victor. There was no grandstanding, no promises of easy wealth, just practical plans and genuine collaboration. Later that evening, as Sarah updated her presentation notes at her favorite cafe, she noticed a young couple at a nearby table. The woman was showing off an elaborate engagement ring, while her friend took photos for social media. Sarah overheard fragments of their conversation about designer wedding dresses and exclusive venues. She felt a sudden urge to warn them, to share what she had learned about the difference between love and lifestyle. Instead, she opened her laptop and began drafting an outline for the Foundation's first workshop series, Building Real Value in a Virtual World. Her phone lit up with another message, but it wasn't from Michael or her lawyer this time. It was from an unknown number with an attachment, a photo that made her blood run cold. The photo showed Victor in what appeared to be a luxury hotel lobby in Singapore, his arm around a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to Sarah's former self. Designer clothes, perfectly styled hair, and that same hungry look in her eyes that Sarah now recognized so well. The message below read, "Still want to testify?" Sarah's hands trembled as she forwarded the message to her lawyer and the investigating team. Within minutes, her phone rang. It was the lead investigator. The photo's metadata had given them crucial information about Victor's current location. She canceled her remaining meetings for the day, except for one, a quick coffee with Jenny. Her sister took one look at her face and knew something was wrong. After Sarah explained, Jenny's expression hardened. "He's trying to intimidate you because he knows you can hurt him. Don't let him win. Not again." Back at her apartment, Sarah found an email from Mei Lin with detailed plans for the Foundation's international expansion. Reading through the practical, thoughtful proposals helped steady her nerves. This was what real business looked like: transparent, methodical, focused on creating genuine value. A soft knock at her door made her jump. It was Michael, holding a manila envelope. "The security team at my company analyzed the photo," he said without preamble. "They found something interesting." He spread several enhanced images across her kitchen counter, pointing out details she had missed: reflections in the hotel's mirrors, a partially visible newspaper date, a distinctive artwork in the lobby. "He's getting sloppy," Michael observed. "He's not just trying to scare you. He's panicking." Sarah studied the young woman in the photo more carefully. "She looks so much like I did. We have to help her before." "We will," Michael assured her. "But first, we need to make sure you're safe. I've arranged for additional security for your trip to Singapore." As they discussed the security arrangements, Sarah noticed how naturally they had fallen back into problem-solving mode together. But it was different now. She was different. She wasn't the same person who had thrown away their relationship for the illusion of luxury. Her phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. "Remember how good it felt? The designer shopping sprees, the 5-star hotels, the envy in everyone's eyes. Walk away now, and you could have it all back." Sarah showed the message to Michael, her hand steady. "He still thinks I'm the same person," she said. "He doesn't understand that it's not tempting anymore." Michael's expression was unreadable as he studied the message. "The authorities can use this," he said finally. "But Sarah, are you sure you want to go through with the testimony? No one would blame you for walking away." The concern in his voice reminded her of everything she had carelessly discarded, but also of everything she had learned. "That's exactly why I have to do it," she replied. "Running away is what the old Sarah would have done." As Michael left, she saw Mei Lin waiting in a car outside. They were probably headed to a late meeting or dinner. The sight didn't sting like it might have before. It felt like watching a different life, one that could have been hers, but no longer needed to be. Sarah spent the evening preparing for her trip to Singapore, laying out practical clothes suitable for meetings with investigators and prosecutors. Her phone kept lighting up with notifications, supportive messages from Jenny, strategic advice from Mei Lin, updates from her lawyer. A final message came in just before midnight. This one was different. A photo of her and Victor on their wedding day, with a single word. "Remember?" Sarah zoomed in on her face in the photo, seeing what she couldn't see then. The hollow happiness, the desperate need to prove something to the world. She opened her laptop and began typing a response to Victor's threats, her fingers moving steadily across the keyboard. "I remember everything," Sarah typed. "That's why you can't manipulate me anymore." She attached a photo of her own, the board meeting presentation where she had exposed the psychological tactics used by financial predators. Let him see exactly who she had become. The reply was immediate. "Don't force my hand, Sarah. I still have friends in high places." She was about to forward this latest threat to her lawyer when another message arrived, a series of photos showing her daily routine, her apartment building, the boutique, the cafe. He was having her watched. Instead of fear, Sarah felt a strange calm. She called Michael's security team, then Jenny, then her parents. Within hours, a plan was in place. If Victor wanted to play games, she would show him how much the rules had changed. The next morning, Sarah walked her usual route to work, hyper-aware of being watched but maintaining her composure. At the boutique, Mrs. Liu was waiting with 2 police officers who specialized in witness protection. They had found evidence of Victor's surveillance team, hired through a series of shell companies that led back to Singapore. "Your testimony must really frighten him," one officer observed. "He's expending considerable resources trying to stop you." Later that afternoon, Maylene arrived at the boutique with an unexpected proposal. "The company has a corporate apartment in Singapore," she said. "High security, private entrance. You'll be safer there than in a hotel." Her eyes met Sarah's with understanding. "Michael suggested it, but he thought it better if I made the offer." Sarah recognized the gesture for what it was, not just protection, but a show of trust from both of them. The old Sarah might have read more into it, created a dramatic narrative of lingering feelings and romantic tension. But she was no longer that person. As she packed for Singapore that evening, Sarah received a call from someone she never expected, Rebecca, one of Victor's previous victims. "I heard he's trying to intimidate you," she said. "He did the same to me last year. That's why I didn't testify." Her voice cracked. "Don't make my mistake." The calls kept coming, more victims reaching out, sharing their stories, offering support. A pattern emerged. Victor had always found a way to silence them, either through threats or bribes or manipulation of their fears and desires. Sarah stayed up late documenting everything, building a comprehensive picture of Victor's methodology. She was so absorbed in her work that she almost missed the notification from her bank. Someone had attempted to deposit a large sum into her account from an offshore source. "Still trying the same old tricks," she murmured, forwarding the information to the investigators. The Victor she had known would have been more subtle, more patient. This desperate version of him was making mistakes. A knock at her door startled her. Through the peephole, she saw Claire, looking agitated. Sarah let her in, noting the unusually late hour. "I'm not taking the job in California," Claire announced without preamble. "After hearing about what's happening with Victor, the foundation needs all hands on deck. Besides," she added with a small smile, "Michael's going to need someone to run things here while you're dealing with the investigation." Sarah started to protest, but Claire held up a hand. "This isn't about Michael, or you, or any complicated history. It's about doing what's right. Victor's not just targeting you anymore. That girl in the photo, she works for one of our partner companies in Singapore. He's getting closer to home." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Victor wasn't just trying to silence Sarah. He was working his way back into the corporate world she had left behind, using the same tactics that had worked before. The young woman in the photo wasn't just a random target. She was bait, meant to show Sarah that he could still hurt people even from afar. Sarah's phone lit up with another message. She expected more threats, but instead it was Michael. "Board-approved emergency funding for the foundation. Whatever you need in Singapore, it's yours. Stop him this time." As Sarah stared at the message, a final text came through from Victor. "Last chance, Sarah. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., Marina Bay Sands. Come alone. Let's talk about your future." Sarah looked at Claire, then at her laptop full of evidence, then at the scattered photos of Victor's victims. Tomorrow would change everything. She just had to decide how. Sarah arrived at Marina Bay Sands at exactly 9 a.m., wearing a simple white blouse and navy skirt. As she walked through the opulent lobby, she felt the weight of a small recording device against her ribs, courtesy of the investigation team hidden throughout the hotel. Victor was waiting at a corner table, looking exactly as she remembered, perfectly tailored suit, practiced smile, Rolex gleaming on his wrist. But now she noticed the slight tremor in his hands, the tension around his eyes. "Sarah," he purred, standing to greet her. "You look different." "That's what authenticity looks like," she replied, remaining standing. "Something you wouldn't recognize." His smile tightened. "Let's not be hostile. I came to make you an offer, a fresh start, away from all this messy legal business, just like old times." Sarah laughed, and the sound surprised them both. "Old times? You mean when you used me to scam innocent people? When you studied my social media to figure out exactly what kind of lies would hook me?" "I gave you everything you wanted," he snapped, mask slipping. "The lifestyle, the status, the envy of everyone who ever looked down on you. Don't pretend you didn't love it." "No," Sarah said quietly. "You gave me what you taught me to want. But I've learned something about want versus value." She placed a folder on the table. "Like the value of evidence." Victor's face drained of color as she opened the folder, revealing photographs of his latest victims, bank statements, email trails. "How did you—" "You're not the only one who can build a network," Sarah cut in. "But mine isn't built on lies." She nodded slightly, and hotel security appeared, accompanied by Singaporean police. Behind them were Michael and Mei Lin, along with several of Victor's previous victims. "You really thought I'd come alone?" Sarah asked as the officers approached. "That's your problem, Victor. You never understood the difference between being alone and being strong." As Victor was led away in handcuffs, Sarah caught a glimpse of the young woman from the threatening photo. She was talking to one of the victim support counselors from the foundation, relief evident on her face. Michael approached Sarah, maintaining a professional distance. "The foundation's first success story," he said, nodding toward the young woman. "Though certainly not the last." Mei Lin joined them, her hand finding Michael's naturally. "The board wants to expand the program internationally. They're thinking of making you global director of advocacy." Sarah smiled, watching as more of Victor's victims connected with each other, sharing stories and support. "I'd like that," she said. "But first, I need to write my victim impact statement for the trial. I finally know exactly what to say." That evening, Sarah sat in her temporary apartment, looking out over the Singapore skyline. Her phone buzzed with messages, Jenny sharing wedding planning details, Mrs. Liu reporting on the boutique's success, Claire updating her on foundation matters, her parents expressing their pride. She opened her laptop and began to write. The greatest fraud wasn't the money he stole, but the lie he sold about what makes a life valuable. True wealth isn't measured in designer labels or social media envy. It's found in the courage to face our mistakes, the strength to help others avoid them, and the wisdom to know that real love, whether romantic, familial, or friendly, is never a transaction. Sarah paused, thinking of Michael and Mei Lin, of her sister's simple wedding plans, of Mrs. Liu's modest boutique filled with quality and care. She thought of the life she'd once desperately wanted and the life she'd actually built. Finally, she added, "Some people spend their lives chasing what glitters, never realizing that gold is found in the truth of who we are, not in the lies we tell about who we wish to be." She closed her laptop and smiled. Tomorrow, she would begin building something real, not a facade of success, but a foundation of substance. The price of greed had been high, but the rewards of authenticity were proving priceless.